Hello, I'm Marilyn Hawes. I'm founder and CEO of the charity Enough Abuse UK. This was created several years ago when I sadly discovered 3 of my 4 children, my 3 boys, had been groomed and sexually abused by a very close family friend who was my boss. I was a teacher and he was the head teacher. And from that, what did I learn? I learnt that the training I had been on, which was a level 1 to level 4 child protection, was not adequate by any means to prevent the harm that happened to my children and so many children around the world. So I worked on this for some time on the behaviours. We have to study and understand the behaviours of these people. I spent 2 years, before I became well actually, I spent 2 years going around asking people who managed offenders, let's see the cause of the problem, and we started building up a timeline. When does it begin? At what stage could you be raising a flag of concern? And early intervention is essential. Understanding the behaviours of these people is essential before any child protection policy. It's the behaviours that count. I'm now going to talk about a little health warning. The nature of this training is hard-hitting. It's different, it's unique, it's memorable. If you're listening to this and completing this online training course, you know your own history, look after yourself, and please just have a pause at any time if it's just too much. And anytime going forward, please contact us on www.ea-uk.org, and we'll be there to take your call and to help you move forward. The key to all of this is, of course, education. Nelson Mandela once said, the greatest weapon we have to change the world is education. Anger and emotion, which would be natural when children are sexually abused, isn't going to change the world. Education will. Now, Dr. Graham Hill is an eminent criminologist, and he actually agrees with me, and he makes 3 very valid points. You and your colleagues are naive if you think you don't know a child abuser. Second one, you can't intervene in something that you don't understand. And thirdly, learning about the foundation of how sexual abuse in children works should feel uncomfortable, or the job hasn't been done appropriately. So what's this program going to focus on? Behaviours. So we'll be looking at why people don't disclose their child abuse, the statistics of the abuse, and the vulnerable. You're going to see that word and hear that word a lot. Who are the abusers? What creates one? You're not born like it. Something happens. What are these grooming predatory behaviours? We'll talk about the Ofsteds, how they see it, and the DBS checks for freelance tutors. We'll be looking at the impact of abuse onto the developing young brain and how that harm is manifested, and then how you thrive, hopefully thrive afterwards, rather than just survive. So 3 things I'd like to take away with you today after you've done the whole of this program is always ask why. Why am I feeling strange? Why is this person creeping me out? Why am I getting that strange feeling in my stomach, that crawly feeling up the back of my neck? When you get this instinct in your gut, that is your second brain. Your solar plexus is your second brain. It starts immediately. It's your internal alarm system. Something doesn't feel right, it sends a message to the front part of your brain to go, beware. So why is this parent not feeling right with me? Why is this pupil not giving me good feelings? Why is this colleague not giving me good feelings? Why am I getting that feeling? And the third thing as well, also along with that, is trust that instinct. Trust that instinct. Don't ignore it. The bird flies away from the cat. By instinct, it knows it's a predator. It flies away and it watches. We don't do that. we stick around and we try and logic it away. Oh, it can't be. It's the priest, it's the teacher, it's dad's best friend, it's granddad, it's the neighbor, it's auntie. And that's why we get burnt. Be more like the bird with the cat. And lastly, be the child. Be that child inside. It's so easy to forget when we're grown up and busy trying to get the children, herding them in the car to get to school. Just stop a second, and when a child is showing untoward behaviors, stop and be that child. What must it be like when you're 6 or 7, silenced by fear because of this big dark dog thing called depression and abuse hanging over your shoulders? Would you be a happy bunny? I don't think so. Walk a meter in that child's shoes and never stop doing that and think. On speaking to abusers, which I do, in and out of prison, they tell me, quite with a smile on their face, we fish for children who take the bait. It's easy. We are studying what's on point for them, what's trending. We make out that we're their best friend. We make it a game. What child doesn't want to play a game with another adult in front of their parents or other people that are caring for them? Scarily, they also say, we choose our next victim by the micro movements in their behavior. These people are expert people watchers. They know immediately. They know. And they smell it like French perfume, is what they say. And they also say something very chilling. Parents are naive about grooming, and it makes it easy for us to abuse their children. So, how observant are you? Before you sat down today to listen to this online training, how many red cars did you pass in the last half mile to work? You won't remember. But if I asked you now to do it again, you would remember, because you'd be looking for it. Why do I say that? Because this is what the abusers rely on. The fact that you're not observant. The fact that they've been there all this time, displaying their grooming in plain sight to normalize it in front of you. And what happens is when you're stressed, so like you're coming to work, you're in a traffic jam, you're going to be late, you've missed the train, anything like that, right up to the fact where your partner has lost their job, you're going to lose your home, even bigger now, your loved one's in intensive care, your child is desperately ill. What are you going to do? Everything's spinning. You can't think straight. And that's true. You can't think straight because your brain is protecting you. What it's doing is it's using its energy to focus on getting you through that trauma so you won't think straight. And in the wings, this person who's been your best friend, whatever, overly attentive to your child, is just waiting for that occasion to happen. They will be waiting for maybe 3 or 4 years before they pounce. They will have cherry-picked the parents or the guardians of that child and befriended them before they then target the child. That's how it works. It's a longer process than online grooming, but the process actually is the same about befriending. And they will wait a very long time. But don't be fooled that this will only be the only child. They will have 4 or 5 children on the go. They'll have the one they're abusing, which will then not be abused because it's no longer attractive. They'll have the one where the grooming is overlapping into the abuse. There'll be one that's being groomed. There'll be one where the grooming has started, and there'll be another on the radar. This is their life's work. They cannot wait for a gap. If somebody moved away or suddenly a child was a squealer, there's a gap. This is how they have their sex life. So it's feeding in from the bottom end all the time, like the planes coming in at Heathrow. And listen to your friends, because you'll be targeted when they sense there's some vulnerability maybe in your own relationship, in your own life. So watch for your friends that will also be maybe warning you, don't dumb them down. Grooming is evident in all abuse, all the abuses. And it is the misuse of power and control, relying on the opportunity and silence which restricts balanced thinking and actions. They will try to wreck the child emotionally through this grooming process before the abuse starts. So they have secured that child to a place where they are not going to tell because of the trust and the so-called respect and the fear. Having established that, then they move to the next stage. But all the abuses have that same coercion of power and control. It comes across with grooming like some sort of covert relationship, a love affair almost, but underneath it, it's power and control over that child's mind and the people around that child. So wherever you'll find children with adults, there's always going to be the risk of grooming and sexual abuse. And this isn't rocket science, because if I'm an alcoholic, I'll go to a pub. If I want to abuse children, I will work with them. I'll put myself in the front line with them, and I will groom in plain sight those extra exaggerated behaviors. Well, afterwards, when maybe I've been arrested and charged, people will go, you know, I always thought they were a bit weird. I always thought there was something odd, little odd, just a little bit outside the norm. You hear that over and over again. It is so deliberate, this, that many offenders I have spoken to, and it would also be true to say if you contacted the Lucy Faithful Foundation, many of them said, even as chillingly as the age of 16, many of them had already chosen their careers to put them in the front line of children. They had chosen to be teachers, social workers, doctors, foster carers, whatever you like, priests, because it puts them in a position of trust, authority, and access to children. You will be the first to be groomed. So if we're now training teachers or anybody in those sort of organizations, the abuser will have targeted the colleague if they're a teacher. They'll have targeted the parents. You will also get the gifts, the exaggerated attention, the flattering remarks, the trips out, events. I'll be there paying your bar bill for you. I'll always be there when something goes wrong. I'll be right by your side. I will be the friend that everybody envies. But of course, you don't know why I'm being that friend. That's the sinister part. The grooming of the vulnerable, there's that word again, is the root cause of all abuses. Radicalization, child sexual abuse, CSA, child sexual exploitation, CSE, radicalization, stalking, trafficking. So who is it you know at risk? Who in your network, in your job, in your life is vulnerable? They may not be vulnerable now, but maybe it was something that will happen, has happened very recently, that makes them vulnerable. We are all vulnerable at times. Adults are vulnerable at times. You see a relationship break down, you're vulnerable. So after a school holiday, what children come back in September or after any school break different to when they were when you knew them previously? And you would be looking at a difference in behaviors. Children don't have the language skills. They don't, but instinctively they will kick off in their behaviors. So why has that child's behavior changed? Are you asking those questions? Are you noting it down? And of course, none more vulnerable than those children who have some disability. Those children are 3 times more at risk. If you're a child that needs assistance in the cloakrooms, then they're very much more at risk. So the people that are monitoring and aiding those children need to be also monitored and watched maybe more closely. 3 times more at risk is a significant rise. This crime of sexual abuse is classless. Don't think it only happens the wrong side of the tracks. It's in every culture. And it's global. It directly links with domestic abuse. It directly links with animal abuse. And it directly links with arson. So where there's a situation, you've got maybe a child that you know who's on your radar or in your care, where there's domestic abuse going on, somewhere in that mix, there's likely to be sexual abuse. Not necessarily with the child, maybe with the mother, but it will be there. It goes together. Animal abuse has been on the radar for years in America and not really taken seriously here. But I'm talking about the brutal abuse of animals. I don't mean treading on the cat's tail in error. I mean swinging the cat round by its tail, even cutting it off. There was a young lad, maybe in the northeast, I think it was, 2 or 3 years ago, cut his rabbit's ears off. There was a young boy down in the West Country who I heard of not so long ago, a 10-year-old, wanted to dig up his dead rabbit and have sex with it. Animal abuse absolutely links with sexual abuse. Most offenders said by the age of 6, they had already been brutal to animals and insects. Putting bees in glue, pulling off butterfly wings. If you look at people in history, Ian Brady, he used to throw cats out of his bedroom window and pleasure himself when they splat on the pavement. You've only got to research Fred and Rose West, another charming couple, and again, animal abuse. Arson. This is something, again, that's been on the radar in America for a long time. We now train firefighters as well. Arson, particularly so with boys. It starts maybe with just experimenting with matches, lighting fires to waste paper bins, then burning a tree, then maybe burning down a barn and a building. And when you ask arsonists why, some of them will say, because my life was out of control, I wanted to take control and see how it feels for you running around like a headless chicken. Of course, there's also the forensic thing, that if you are an abuser, you'd want to burn any of forensics. But also true to say those who have been abused may like to definitely harm the abuser. But the point is so often missed, which is where all now, thankfully, the emergency services now collaborate, is the dynamic that's going on in that family. The child who sets fire to the sofa, to the bed, to where the abuse is about to happen, in the hope that it will distract and deter the abuse happening again. That's quite powerful, and that's what a lot of children who are arsonists say, that they actually burn where the abuse will happen. Recognizing an abuser from their behavior is absolutely key to safeguarding. The abuser is often least likely person you can imagine. If you go to some of these prisons, you'll see a lot of white-collar workers there with excellent manners, softly spoken, clean, know how to behave themselves. But please don't forget pupil-on-pupil abuse. Many of the abusers will say they were already fiddling and showed an interest when they were 10 and 11 years old. So here we are talking about year 5 and 6 children who are showing overly sexualized behaviors. At that point, this is where your early intervention comes in. Why? Is it something that should be monitored more closely? Yes. Is it something that needs the staff to talk about in depth? Yes. Could that person go on and be an abuser? Yes. Maybe not. No one's saying it's a defined science that if you're overly sexualized at that age, that they will go on and be an abuser, but you need to be looking at it and asking why. Where has that come from? Where has it come from? Where's it emanated from? You're looking at children even in infant school, where there's children that can't leave each other's bottoms alone. You know, in an overtly high level, not just child's play, but a lot of child's play in schools, in quotes, child's play, has been missed over the years as something far more sinister. And of course, that then carries on into the secondary school, where that abuse then does carry on. If you're watching this and you are an employee in an education environment, please use your staff, your ancillary staff, as your spies. They see and hear things that the actual teaching staff don't see. The children drop their guard when someone like the janitor is around, or the gardeners, or the cleaners, or the matrons. They drop their guard. They feel more relaxed. They don't see those members of staff as the face of authority. So please encourage those members of staff play such an important part in the safeguarding in your organization. And sometimes they feel that they're not welcome, or they don't feel able to make a referral or a complaint to the teaching staff. Do encourage it. You'll be amazed what they see and what they hear. So some statistics. 9 out of 10 children know their abuser. 90% of reported sexually abused children were abused by someone they knew. 60% in the family, a very, very hard one to disclose when you're a child. 30% close associates and friends. 9% females and child on child. Now, the research on females, female paedophilia, needs far more input. We know that 50% of female paedophiles do work with men, but much more research has to be done on this. Women by nature are more nurturing. It's actually harder, I think, to identify a female abuser, but they are there. Much more, obviously, it's much more in the 90% mark with men. The 1% opportunist, that goes back to my day, if you're my age, of stranger danger. Don't talk to somebody in the park. Like little Sarah Payne, who was sadly abducted and murdered, the Chancellor. But true to say, actually, if we're talking of online grooming and online abuse, talking to strangers on the internet, I think the stranger danger could be better, could be well placed being brought in again, actually. Online, don't talk to people you don't know. And I think it should become part of our vocabulary again. But it's very difficult when it's in the family to disclose. Interesting statistics have been done by the Family Education Trust over a period of about 40 years. And it's quite interesting to see how the demographic changes. So they say the safest, and naturally so, the safest group would be where the biological parents are married and the family intact. But of course, that doesn't mean that granddad or auntie or whatever, brother, sister, isn't up to anything. But watch and listen to how that ramps up. It's 6 times increased the risk when the biological mother is divorced and has remarried. It's 14 times higher when the biological mother lives alone, because of the vulnerability. I was in that group. It's 20 times higher when the biological father lives alone. Well, of course, more mates come round, more men will probably offer to help because it's more of his mum's job to do, and of course, that father is also at risk. 20 times higher when the biological parents are not married but cohabiting. And that's a huge spike from the very first one, where it says the safest one is marriage. 20 times higher, purely because that couple are not married. When you ask the Family Education Trust, they point out, and this is very interesting, that a lot of people just move in together because it's financially viable. They didn't actually mean that person was going to be a life partner, that they had made a choice decision to put a ring on the finger and get married. It's a girlfriend, boyfriend you're living with, oh, let's just move in together. And then somebody gets pregnant, which isn't on the other person's agenda, and that relationship breaks down. So that makes the parent vulnerable again. So that's the significance there with the 20 times higher. 33 times higher when the biological mother is cohabiting with a man. Now, you've only got to look around the UK and see how many young girls, 15, 16, are young mums. And it's true to say, in the town near where I live, a little 9-year-old told me last year, it was about July, and I'd been teaching in a school, and she said, oh, look at that man over there, miss. And I thought, oh, what am I going to hear? And she said, he's my 8th daddy this year. So one boy comes in, maybe 18, 19, with a vulnerable young mum, call him daddy, out goes that guy. 5 weeks later, in comes another one. So you can see how that vulnerability spikes. And these are interesting things to put in to the melting pot, if you like, when you're looking at a case within your organization where discussion is taking place because there is a suspicion of abuse. It's a little bit more pepper and salt to the casserole, if you like. So what are we telling children about consent? Are we doing it? What are we telling them about abuse? Are we doing it? Because if they don't understand, then how can they ever report it? What are those two things? Now, consent is understanding the consequence of your decision. Not just saying yes, but what does it mean with my yes? What about me saying no? I don't want you to come any closer. But what does my yes mean? What is the responsibility we're teaching children? We must teach children to think. So if you take an example from my own life, when my son, who's now 37, wanted to play football when he was 7, he said, I want to play football on a Saturday, Mum. And I went, okay, I'll take you, I'll watch you, I'll wash your kit. But this is what you've got to do. You just don't say yes, you have got an alarm clock. You're going to have to set it. You can read the time. You set your alarm clock every Saturday morning to wake up. You'll clean your own boots, and you put your kit out to wash, and I will wash it, but I'm not going to go looking for it. So it's not just about your yes, there's a consequence to it. And that's what we've got to teach children to think. Don't just say, yes, I want to go to some burger bar with you. Why? Who's going to take me there? Can I tell my mum? Can I take a friend? Who's paying? What time will I get back? These children have got to think about the consequence of their yes or their no, and we have to be having that conversation with them. So what is abuse? Well, we know there's the different types of abuse, but how does a child actually know what it feels like? Are we explaining how that creepy feeling in their stomach, that feeling, this isn't quite right, I don't know what to do? How do you, or don't you say, you know, they've been silenced. This is perfectly normal. This is special love. This is special because you're so handsome, you're so pretty. But still inside, it doesn't feel quite right. So that feeling is the point at which the child needs to say something. Are you having that discussion with them? But all abuse is the misuse of power and control over the vulnerable, causing harm for personal gain. These people enjoy what they're doing. So the age of criminal responsibility is 10 years old. It's 8 years old in Scotland. So it's all very well and good not wanting to criminalize children because that sits on their records. But if something's criminal, it's criminal. And it has to be dealt with, or that child will go on and do something worse. All too often, police and social services are viewing as two underage youngsters engaging in sex as being consensual. Well, no child under 16 can consent to sex, and no child under 16 can do it. So both are actually breaking the law. So do we criminalize them? Do we allow it to continue? What do we do? What do we do? Those children need to be mentored and helped. Otherwise, the thing just escalates out of control. We have a law, and that law has got to be engaged. In my view, you can't have 12-year-olds all having sex with each other because we don't want to actually criminalize them. Something has to happen, and a line in the sand has to be made. So, are you able to prevent abuse? A, acknowledge. B, believe. L, listen. E, educate. So, do you acknowledge this is a big problem in our society? It's endemic. Do you acknowledge, as one of my first slides, we all know someone who's abusing? Do you actually believe it? Or do you think we're all barking mad? And are you listening? And by that I mean, not just listening to me now, which would be lovely, but I'm talking about, are we listening to the clues that the children give? I started this charity with a girl called Jo Evans, and she was abused by a guy called Robert Peverett. You can look him up. She went to a school in Dulwich, and you can look him up. His nickname with the girls was Pervy Pev. And she used to run around the school with her mates and they'd say, Pervy Pev's coming, run. No one ever asked, why'd you call him Pervy Pev? Now, listening, we've got 3 or 4 case studies I'd just like to share with you now of children under 6 years old where we were called in because their behavior had drastically gone off the wall from being very, very lovely children, very well adapted. Suddenly something was wrong. Head banging, wetting their pants, being verbally aggressive, and then also regressive. Everything had gone out the window. Why? So off we go to visit. Is there anything they've said? Because bear in mind, this is a game. Oh, on all 3 occasions, it came out that the little girl, sweet little thing, her daddy was playing this game of putting his hanky in her pocket. But when we tried the game, there was your disclosure. A little boy had been talking about his cousin coming round to play Thomas the Tank Engine. Perfectly innocent. Then we played the game. Another disclosure. And then there was another little lad called Simon. And he obviously actually nearly sort of got it, really, I suppose. But he went to his mum and he said, Mummy, when you go to work on a Saturday morning and Daddy does the garden, the next door neighbour comes in the back door and he asks if I'd like to suck his toffees in his bag. And his mummy said, that's nice, darling. I hope you say thank you. And then we had another lad who had literally strangled the school guinea pig. And I was told, oh, you should see the parents. No, that's psychotic. There you have it. That extreme animal abuse. There you have it. What's going on? Where's it coming from? And where's it going to? Not, oh, he was a bit rough. It's more than that. And of course, educate, which is why you're doing this, supporting Nelson Mandela. It's the only greatest and only weapon we have to change the status quo. Let's have some more statistics. 1 in 20 children in the UK have been sexually abused. 1 in 5 children are reporting any other sort of serious abuse. 1 in 5 adults are reporting abuse in childhood. Adults abused sexually as children are 12 times more likely to try to take their own life. And these are figures that have been reported through the police. This isn't made up on the back of a cornflake packet. So these sexualized behaviors for many of these offenders began at 10, 11 years old, as I said previously. They'd already started fiddling, and that behavior had become normalized. And no one actually has, in the past, really dug down to see where has it come from. And these children need help. This is why we can, you're never going to stop this crime, but we can contain some of it if we acted differently in those early stages. So do we ask why? Why is this child now off the wall? Why? Or do we just assume? Are we just too busy? Do we not really care? Oh, well, it's just kids. Do we? See, happy children don't bully. So why is it happening? Negative behaviors have negative reasons. Are you asking why? Do you just say, we don't have bullying in this school, off you go and behave, or I'll get the parents in? Or, and it requires more time, do you have the child who's the bully in and say, I know you're not happy, and we as a staff are going to try and unravel what that problem is. Do you have any idea? No, miss. Well, if you don't ask, you're never going to go and find the problem. And our job as teachers is to actually try and get these children to a place where they are responsible, caring people in society. So we have to work with that child who is the bully. Where's it come from? Why is it behaving like why it is? And then the child who has been bullied. We can't say, oh, why did you let that child do it to you? Oh, it's my fault, is it? That's not appropriate. So what do we got to do with this child who's the victim of bullying? We got to try and build that child up, make them more resilient. You know, it's a tough old world out there, Sonny. We're going to try and now, as a staff, to make you more resilient, more robust, so you can stand your ground a bit more. I guess the second stage will get better results than the first one. But if you don't ask that question why, everything continues the same. And the bully goes out into the adult world and becomes a bully in society. I look back on my career and I sometimes think now, was it the wisest thing to have had the child in my office and the parent or the guardian at the same time when we're talking about this child's behaviour? There was a person who once worked with us who said he had lots of bruises and his mum would push him down the stairs before his father would come in and give more bruises and everything else on top. So when these bruises were discovered, mum was invited in and the little lad, now a grown-up man, was asked, oh, well, where's it all come from? And mum said, well, you're very clumsy, aren't you? You fall down the stairs every night. And the little lad said, oh, yes, mummy, I do. Be the child. Be the child. You're sat in that room with the carer, guardian, parent, who is quite likely part of the problem. Would you be open? And I can think back now to my career and I can think of 2 or 3 children that I could have done a better job with had I thought it through and knowing what I know now. So I'm not always sure that it's a wise thing in the first maybe couple of meetings. Let's see if you can unearth some problems without somebody from the home environment being there. And Ofsted, carry on this with the voice of the child must be heard. All staff must read and sign Part 1 of the Keeping Children Safe in Education document, and this must be recorded. Now, if you have Ofsted on your back, just arriving on your doorstep, and they hand out the questions to the staff, the pupils, and the parents, and somebody says, you want to try reporting something in this school, it's never ever taken in seriously. That's going to really prick up the attention of the Ofsted inspectors, who will then be looking at all your recording documents. And if they find that any member of staff has not signed that Part 1 of the Keeping Children Safe in Education document and it hasn't been recorded, you will go into special measures. And frankly, I think that's right. So let's ask you, why don't people tell? If I asked you right now in front of your friends, can you tell the person next to you the best sex you've ever had in public? Would you do that? You probably think, I must have misheard that. But you wouldn't do it because, of course, it's private. It may be embarrassing, whatever. But, you know, hopefully you're a consenting adult. But what if you're the child and you've been silenced by fear and toxic shame? That's where it starts, the breaking of that child emotionally through the grooming before it moves on. So why won't people tell? Well, you're not going to tell me the best sex you've had in the last 3 months. I mean, why not? We're hopefully consenting adults. But now be the child. You're 6, 7 years old. And now the moment's come where I've been your friend for a long time, and at last, I've got Joe on my own. And going through those stages of how an abuser grooms, now I've got the opportunity, space on my own. Very quickly, the touch changes and becomes something else, as does the dialogue. You're dirty. You won't be believed. Mummy will die if you tell her. It's your fault. You came down with nothing on. You wanted it. You won't tell. You'll lose friends. You'll go in a care home. Nobody will ever love or hug you again if you tell anybody. You're special. You're my special friend. You won't tell. You won't tell. Shh. It's our little secret. Are you going to tell? Mummy's going to die. You might go in a care home. Oh, and another one. You'll break up the family. You're 7. What a huge responsibility. You're going to break up the family. Were you bullied? I was bullied as a child. I can still remember the girl's name. I've never forgotten what she said. And that's another reason why people don't tell. It sits behind their eyes for decades. And then maybe one day in their 40s, it all gets too much and bingo! In comes a massive meltdown, a nervous breakdown, whatever, an attempted suicide. That's the reality of this. So these children here, I'd like you just to write down how they present themselves. They're about 10 and a half years old, year 6 children. How do you think they present themselves to you? What decision have you made about them looking at these photos? So, I don't know what decision you've made, but these are my boys when they were 10 and a half years old. They're twins. They allow me to use their photos for the purpose of training. They're now 31 years old. Peter is on the right. He's very dark-haired and he's got olive skin and dark eyes. Not the sort of profile that the abuser actually was attracted to, but they were twins. Clever man. He had to abuse both of them because had they spoken to each other, then if one said this happens and the other didn't, then what? The other one on the left, fair-haired, blue-eyed, the same colouring as the older brother. This is the one, this was the actual colouring that he really liked. And when we looked back over the people he had abused, they were all pretty much fair to blonde, blue-eyed. So they looked pretty much okay, but the behaviour had changed. The boy on the left, he had started grinding his teeth. He had developed psoriasis, asthma, stomach migraine. He developed a twitch, actually, where the side of his face, the right-hand side of his face, would drop down as if he was having a stroke. And he anxiously would pick away at the cuff on his school sweatshirt. So I was actually having to replace it every 6 weeks. He'd become very verbally aggressive, and he wasn't that sort of child at all. His work in school had dropped, and he stopped wanting to go to school. And I never asked him why. But the behaviors were there. You can't tell by looking at someone. You can't tell by looking at someone if they are the abuser or the abused. It's the behaviors that are the clue. So another little slogan of mine, safer. S for sense, A for alert, F for focus, E for engage, R for record. You sense it in your gut. You really, truly do. People say, oh, you know, people might think I'm a paedophile because I put my arm around that child. No, no, no. You sense this eerie feeling. It's no different to you getting in a lift with someone. One person, man or woman, you get in, you're absolutely fine. But somebody else gets in that lift and you're already creeping. You think, oh, I want to get out. It's that sort of feeling. You just know. And then you become alert to it. What is going on? Why am I feeling like this? And then you focus on it. Hang on a minute. Who was this with? Have I seen it before? What time of day was it? What was it? What have I seen? Now, if that's all you do, you've kept everything in your head. The call to action is engage and record. You must make this the last taboo. You must engage with your colleagues. You must talk to people. We cannot have this swept under the carpet anymore. If we want to change things, we have to change us. And we have to start having that dialogue. You must talk. Because if you don't and you miss it, you're going to feel dreadful. And if you don't and you choose not to, then you're actually exacerbating the problem because that person is carrying on. Now, you could have 10 different people in the members of staff that one and each of them have seen just something weird about my behavior, I'm the abuser, something weird, and they go, no, you know, I'm not going to tell the designated safeguarding leader because I probably misunderstood it. No, I've only seen it once or twice. You're not the person that has to validate it. The safeguarding team are. Now, if there's 10 members of staff that have all seen 1 or 2 odd weird things about me, that's a real problem. And you don't know If your bit is the bit that joins up the dots, that is the final piece of the puzzle, you have to record it. Write everything down you see. It is not your job to validate that decision. You hand it all in, and that is what Ofsted will want to see as well. Everything that you think is not right, hand it in. You do not want to be like me and the school that missed what was going on. So I want to show you what I mean by sensing, alert, and focus. So Adam here, we're fellow teachers maybe, or I'm a parent, or whatever it is, and I'm meeting him for the first time, and I just want to shake his hand. Hi Adam, really nice to meet you. You make great coffee, it's lovely. Thanks very much for letting me here. Fantastic, thanks very much. Cool. Now I'm going to do it again. Adam, thank you so much for letting me come here today. It's been really, really nice of you, and the coffee's fantastic. And I just wondered if maybe we could have a drink afterwards and talk about the job that you're about to take on, and, you know, and some interest in the school here that I've come to see. Would that be all right?
I'll have to check my schedule first.
I can assure you now he hates it, and I can tell you how I know. Thank you, Adam. Did you like it? I know you didn't. No.
So
Now I'm speaking to the camera, okay? So you've done your bit now.
Okay.
All right, thank you. All right. So what was different? If you liked the second version, well, hello, victim. I was the abuser. What am I looking for? I'm looking for vulnerability. I'm going through a checklist to see, have I chosen the right person here? What did I do differently? I moved into Adam's private space. I held his hand. His handshake changed dramatically in the second one. He couldn't wait to get away. He was trying to pull away. You see, you can't fake body language. He couldn't look at me properly. His eyes were he doesn't realize he was doing it, but his pupils dilated like that. And I knew he wasn't comfortable. I could see he was all over the place. He's flushed. He flushed up. What did I try and do? I looked into his eyes to read that vulnerability. I lowered my voice. These people are charming. They're very quietly spoken. They're very good on their soft skills. They're charming, very charming. I tried to make an appointment to meet up with him afterwards. Let's see, would he like to meet me? Would he like to extend it? But he wasn't vulnerable because his whole body language told me, but that's okay. I lost one, I maybe lose 8 more, but there will be somebody who maybe that day has learnt that their partner's left them, they're going to lose their job, their home maybe, whatever. Vulnerability. Their child is in intensive care. Oh, my word. And someone goes, just sit down. Just have a coffee. I'll look after you. If you've been sworn at a lot by a partner and someone doesn't swear at you and just sit down, shh, I'll look after you. You go to it like a moth to a flame. So I'm going to take you through the behavior of the fixated paedophile. This process is something that was put in a document by a guy called Ray Wire, who formed the Gracewell Institute. And he researched everything about paedophilia in 1980. And this document was drawn up in the very early 90s, late 80s. Nothing's changed. This is the blueprint of how paedophiles work. And when I've spoken to offenders, be they 28 or 58, they have all followed these 4 stages. So stage 1, this person will fantasize and masturbate to previous sexual contacts. And then they'll become fixated about anticipated contacts. They'll get to know a child informally in the school or a sports club, in the street. They'll get to know the parents and schmooze up to them and make them their best friend. Then they'll get to know the child socially, making excuses with the parents or the carers. Oh, why don't we just go to the cinema? Why don't I take him out somewhere? Why don't I take him swimming? You know, I've been your friend for a long time. What could possibly go wrong? And then I bring the child home, and that trust is now beginning to form. That's stage 1. Stage 2, I'll find out what's troubling the child at home. I'll find out what's troubling that child at school. Don't forget, I've selected someone who's vulnerable. I'll become that child's friend. I'll become its counsellor. Tell me everything. Tell me everything. I will often target neglected children because, of course, they're vulnerable. And my friendship and my counselling and my mentoring often takes place in the car. It's very easy to stay close to someone, accidentally touch their knee, put their hand around the back of the chair in the car, and there you have stage 2. Stage 3, I'll invite the child to come round to my house, but in a very clever way. I'll make sure, oh, you know, if you wanted to come round, it's perfectly all right. You might like to ask your mum and dad. So it's the child's fault, you see, not mine. You were the one that asked. I will also encourage to tell the child to tell his parents that, oh, you know, Mr. X or Mrs. X said I might like to come round there, Mum, but, you know, do you think I could? Making it very, very innocent. And then when the child finally comes around my house, some very strong physical contact will take place in a form of sexual wrestling. I'll teach the child to play games, close up and personal, like chess, cards. It could be in a room 20 foot square or 20 meters square, but I'll make sure I'm needing to play something up close and personal. I will watch TV with this child up close, not in separate rooms, possibly even with that child sitting on my lap. That's stage 3. Let's talk about lap sitting, and the police will tell you this is one of the key factors. Somebody's always encouraging that child on their lap. Now, my experience, I had 4 children. I never once had to say, come and sit on my lap. Come and sit on my lap. Whose needs are being met? Most kids just come and flop themselves on you. Mum, 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 you know, and half of them haven't washed and they come home from school with mucky pups and whatever it is. But you probably don't want them on your lap, but this person does. Now, if you're a gentleman watching, even a lady, I'm now going to be a male abuser, okay? Now, this child has bounced all, and I've encouraged this child to come and sit on me, and it's sat on me. But I'm a man, and I've got this child now sat on my lap, like this. Is that correct? I suggest most gentlemen would immediately put the child like that, or like that. Women, we do this because we don't have the special parts that the guys have got. But a man that does that and then sits like this, in plain sight, don't forget this grooming. So this will all be going on in plain sight, sitting here like this, testing the audience. Who's not liking this? Who's not liking it? Now, has anybody noticed that my left hand is missing? My left hand is right down this child's pants. So right in your face, I'm abusing it. Now, I could be at some sort of party where this child is sat on my lap and the dad is not comfortable with what he's seeing and wants to get Joe off his lap. But Joe isn't going to move anywhere because, you see, this is our little game. And he and I have already had a little chat that when I come round for drinks tonight and all Mummy and Daddy's friends are around, come and sit on my lap and we'll play a little game. And every letter that you get right that I draw on your back, I'll press your tummy and you get £5 for every one that you get. And then you'll be able to get those fantastic football boots that you want. So this child won't be going anywhere, even if the father doesn't like it. But what if I'm a girl? Look what I've got with my hand. 8-year-old girl sat on my lap, developing. How hideous must that be for a young girl? The humiliation of holding a child like that. Everybody else, quite innocent, just making sure that child doesn't fall off the lap. Lap sitting is a key part every time with this offline grooming. Stage 4, now we ramp it up. I'll start putting my arm around the child when they're on their own with me. If there's some resistance, I will withdraw. But 2 or 3 weeks later, I'll try again. And then if it's accepted, there is a dramatic increase in my fantasy and my expectation that this child is very soon going to become my sexual partner. I will start touching through clothing. If that child withdraws again, I will pull away. At this stage, there's nothing that will put me in prison. But then I'll try again and I'll touch again outside of clothing. If this time it's accepted, it moves very quickly into the next stage. Not much talking takes place. It very quickly goes to gross indecency. I'll find out if this child or other friends would like to come round. And of course, I will be naming certain friends. So what I'm doing now is I'm setting this child up to procure other children for me. And I would have set out the names I quite like, but, oh, I've noticed you're friendly with this child. Would they like to come round for dinner or whatever? Come to the cinema? So that child is set up now as a procurer. I warn the child not to tell anybody. And mutual masturbation then takes place. And it can carry on for quite a while with ejaculation. And then it will move on to oral sex and then buggery on the boy or the child or the girl, and then on the offender. And that's stage 4. What you need to understand is the object of all this grooming in your face is any opportunity for my genitals to be rubbed through clothing. This is foreplay, in your face, in front of you, but so subtle, they're just little things that go, that's a bit weird. But for me, I'm getting turned on by it. So let's look at carrying a child. This would be the normal way to carry a child, and some guys put the children up on their necks and all of that, but this is the normal way. But how about this one? I've come around your house, I'm picking up your child, who's about 7, 8 years old, whatever, baby. I go, hey, Joe. Oh, come on, put your legs around me, that's it. And I'm letting this child slip and bring it back up again and slip. Oh, my golly, what are you feeding him on? Heavens above, he's putting so much weight on, I can hardly carry you, Joe. Is that normal? Does it feel right? Doubt it. There's another sign. So, on stage 4, stage 3, stage 4, it comes up about wrestling games. And this is a document that is like 30 odd years old. This isn't dad larking about romping. This is a situation where the child will be flat. The child be on the floor, on a sofa, on a bed, on the grass, flat. And I will be on top of this child. And I'm going on top, and I'll be right on top of this child, and I'll be giving the child all this, yay, romping, but it's pinned down. And look what's happening. I'm right on top here of this child. And the veins on my head will be coming up with almost exploding. It's that same energy that you get before climax. You will not miss it. You can't miss it. And the child will be hysterically laughing, be unbelievable. And you'll think, goodness, that child's going to explode. And then I'll be on the floor flat. And the child will be right on top of me, rubbing all this and pulling it up by its pants. That is the sexual wrestling that I'm referring to. You cannot mistake it. It is not your normal dad pretending to be Superman. It's not that. There's an energy in it that will take your breath away. And that's in your face. That is the foreplay before the abuse. All this stuff is in play before the abuse, normalizing the behavior. Oh, it was a bit odd, I don't know what it was. That sort of thing. Now, 18 months ago, my son, the one on the left, the fair-haired one, was at a garden party in a vicar's garden. And he saw this very thing happening with a young girl. He immediately identified it for what it was. He found the mum, and he said, look, I don't wish to interrupt, but is that your child there? And she said, yes. And my son said, who's the man? He said, oh, it's my new boyfriend. And my son said, let me tell you something. And he told her the story and said, if it hasn't happened, it's going to happen. I've been where that daughter of yours is. That is foreplay. That is the grooming. That is almost the final stage before the abuse. I'm going to present a list to you now that was actually given to me by people who manage high-risk child abusers. And it's a bullet point of several behaviours that, frankly, I think most of us do. But in this case, you're looking at exaggeration of all those behaviours and at least 5 or 6 of this mix of behaviours in one person. And if you can tick about 6 of these exaggerated behaviours in one person, you really should be raising a flag. So you're looking at people where children may have become uncomfortable in their presence, trying to avoid them, someone who's more interested in being around children than in adults, appearing to want to get very involved, always the one with the first hand up to do the children's activities with children. Well, of course, the person that's also been subject to previous concerns, always wanting to be alone, appearing self-sacrificing. No, you go over there. You know, I don't mind having a cold beef burger and warm beer. I'll play with the children, no problem. Very keen to big myself up, anxious to talk about my very good character and all the different charities I'm working for and what I'm doing. Very concerned about my status and quite authoritative. So I'm sort of the person you really wouldn't want to sort of cross, God, I wouldn't, a bit in awe of them. I will speak about children in very idealistic and unrealistic ways. Now, children are great, they're lovely, but we also know what they can also be. But these people, no, they think children are little saints. Oh, they're wonderful. I'm just so good with them. These people have the ability to be like the Pied Piper. The children flock to them like bees around a honeypot. They will obviously gravitate to children that are vulnerable. They will seem less interested in older adolescents. And they will obviously be very keen to befriend families where there's strife, or single families where there's stress in the family, be it financial or whatever. They'll target those people because, again, that magic word, vulnerability. And then as for taking photographs, they'll be very keen to take photographs of children and getting them wearing shorts and swimwear. And I have to say that the most easy place and very common place to abuse a child is in the water, in a swimming pool. But you take 5 or 6 of those behaviors in an exaggerated way. Let me give you one example when I mean avoid. Jo Evans, who started this, as I say, started this charity with me. She was being abused by Robert Peverett, who was the head teacher at the school. He was also head of maths. And her dad was chair of governors. Now, obviously, because of the abuse, her grades had dropped. And every Saturday morning, her mum would take her to see Pervy Pev. And Jo would hang on to the car door. I don't want to go there, Mum. I don't want to go in there. And Mum would unpeel her fingers and say, get in there, my girl. You've got to get your exams. That's what I mean by exaggerated behavior. Not, oh, I don't want to go there, it's boring. That exaggeration that you think, that's over the line. So how do I know I haven't got a squealer? It's easy. I've been your friend for a long time, coming around, being that best friend that people envy, and then something significant happens. Your mum has gone into intensive care. There I am. Remember that slide, the observant slide? I've been waiting in the wings for a long time. There I am, bang, I'm on it now. I'm on a roll. I'm in the foot in the door. And I take over. Instead of saying, oh, how can I help? What can I do? I know you're not thinking straight because you've now got a trauma. And I say, okay, I'll pick Jo up from school. I'll tell Dad. I'll tell the school, I'll tell Auntie, you go and visit. Give me the keys, I'll take Jo out for tea and bring him back. You're going, thank you, thank you, thank you. But a good friend would be going, how can I help? How can I help? This person has now taken control and the power. So I pick the child up from school, I take him out for tea. And I go, hey, look, I know your mum likes giving you all sorts of natural juices and all sorts of things, like cranberry juice and everything, but how about this? How about some Coca-Cola? There are other brands on the market, of course, but how about Coca-Cola? It's not going to ruin your teeth and make your tummy brown, but, don't tell her. I know it's a special treat for you from me because you're stressed as well with Nana. So shh, don't tell her for goodness sake, because I've got lots of things lined up for us. We're going to be able to go to all sorts of museums and swimming pools and all sorts of fun when Nana comes out. So for goodness sake, don't drop me in it, or the wheels will come off the wagon. So shh, be the child. We're going to have fun. Wow. So there we have it, you see now. Fast forward. Nana is about to come out of intensive care, and I find another excuse now to get Jo really on my own at home. Oh, I said, tell you what, I know Joe's told me that Nan's coming out of hospital. So what I thought was, taking control again, what I thought was on Friday, I'll pick him up from school and I'll keep him until Sunday. So I'll have him for the whole weekend and you and the family can decide what's going to happen to Nan while we're away. Because, you know, Joey's listening to everything. So that's what I'll do. Make sure you pack the swimming gear because I've said we'll go swimming. No better place to abuse a child than in the swimming pool. It's easy. You take them down the slides with the child between your legs. Oh, all in plain sight. All in plain sight. You help them in the changing rooms, etc. So you're going to say yes to this because you're so relieved. And then as I walk away, I go, oh, just one thing I've got to ask you. And I bet he's dropped me in it. I bet he has. And I'd hate you to think I've got secrets, but... And I know it's against house rules, and you're not going to like me for it, but did he tell you I've been pouring Coca-Cola down his throat all week? And I know it's a big no-no for you. Did he tell you? If he didn't, game on. I haven't got a squealer. Simple. No problem. But if he did say yes, I go, oh, the little monkey. Oh, you can't trust children, can you? And slowly but surely, you'll watch me pull away. I won't be so, because I don't want to get caught. And then once I've got my foot through that door, and I've used this whole process of having to help the family, I'll then divide and rule. I'll make sure I tell a little nasty thing about the partner to the mum, and about the mum to the partner, and about the auntie to the mum, and about the mum to the auntie, etc., etc. So in the end, I've got everybody feeding into me because they trust me. What could possibly go wrong? And I stop them talking to each other. You drop a little tiny seed of, I saw your partner in the wrong place. Actually, I saw your husband. Your money's tight at the moment. I saw him down the bookies. But don't say anything. Don't say anything. Very clever. And those little seeds are like a cancer. They grow. And before you know it, you've caused division in the ranks. And you've got them like this, eating out your hand. It's all about power and control and brainwashing. So child abusers are plausible, devious, manipulative, and it is an addiction to offend. The brokenness happened in their childhood. Something happened. So if this is a child's brain, perfectly okay. If you have significant abuse happen, and there's no correlation proof that says these abusers were sexually abused, about 1 in 8 were sexually abused, but the other 7 out of 8 had other forms of abuse or a situation that created a real trauma in that child. So here we are at home being verbally abused, being sworn at, being smacked, all this stuff, being neglected, whatever. Or it could be that this child was perfectly okay and then something tragic happened when they were 5 or 6 or 7 years old. And the dangerous thing here is cortisol. And cortisol spikes and it eats away at the healthy brain cells. It changes the landscape of the brain. It recodes the brain. And therefore you've got this distortion. Now that child starts school with this Play-Doh brain. So it's no wonder that its behaviors are going to be off the wall. But also, its experience of affection and relationship isn't right. If you've suffered this sort of abuse, of physical abuse, neglect, whatever, and then you're told, oh, I love you. Oh, okay, fine. So this is now distorted. And then you get to 10 or 11 years old, and your testosterone is working very nicely, thank you very much. But this is frozen. The brain, the heart here has got a very strange example and experience of good relationship. And over here, you've got this testosterone. And this has not been dealt with. So this person who's going to abuse steps back and steps back. And that's the problem. It gets uses the testosterone on the child, because the brain, the emotional part of the child, has not gone in harmony with the head, the heart, and the sexuality. That's how it should be. But it's staggered. It's a broken line, and that's the problem. So what happens is repetition. The abuser fuels his conditioning or her conditioning, because there are females, by fantasizing and masturbating. And the frequency they do that strengthens the desire. And that's what this therapy does. The therapy with offenders is trying to push back that desire to masturbate and to fantasize. Because that distortion in the brain, that Play-Doh brain I've just shown you, it exists. It hasn't been managed. It hasn't healed. So the most dangerous time for a child's life is at the point it has been abused. Because in that moment, when that person is gratified, can rationale come in and, oh, what have I done? And that's when that child is most at risk. For example, Sarah Payne. For example, April Jones, the little girl in Wales. The panic of the reality of what that person's done. It's that point is the most dangerous time for a child. Very quickly, it's okay again with any luck, because the person has fantasized again. But if that fear of being disclosed is so strong, the child could lose its life. So revisiting the Play-Doh brain, if you like, all abusers have experienced some form of abuse or brokenness, as I explained with the Play-Doh brain. But we must remember, by no means, not all the abused end up as abusers. And that is a myth that needs to be absolutely dead and buried. Most people would never abuse. Most don't, because it is so repugnant. Most don't. Sadly, some do, but not all. These people will rely on power, opportunity, and silence. And nothing more so than the big organizations. The BBC is a classic one. The football world, the sports world, the theatre world, you name it. They rely on silence. It's blocked by fear. But if you take one of those out, if the person isn't powerful or assumed a misuse of power, then it's not going to work. If the opportunity never arises, it's not going to work. And if you can't get silence, it's not going to work. But those are the three factors that have to be in play for the success of this crime. And now the DBS checks. Well, they have to be done, of course, but frankly, they're not worth the paper they're written on. They have to be done. But you don't get a dodgy DBS unless you've been convicted. That does not mean caught. It doesn't mean charged. It doesn't mean going into court. You have to be convicted. Ballpark figure, about 3 out of every 1,000 that the police have investigated will end up with an actual conviction. And that's the trouble with historic abuse. Historic abuse is actually anything that's over a year. But this is why it's so important that people do speak, because the more historic it becomes, the harder it is to find evidence, because you won't have any forensics if it's 20 years old, and it's a harder job for the police to do. But the thing is, the law stated when the sex offenders register came in 1997, it wasn't retrospective. So it actually means that, say in 1996, you're 38 years old and you've just come out of prison, having done 8 years for abusing babies. If you have not been reconvicted, you will not be even on the sex offender register. Now, there's thousands of people walking around our streets with convictions that go back to before 1997 that will never have been reported. And then in 2016, in the March, several hundred sex offenders decided they'd done time, then they actually objected to being on a barring list of being around children. So they took it to the European Court of Human Rights and they won. So those particular few hundred that did that decision are no longer on a ban of working with children, and we call this safeguarding. So a little tip, if you're recruiting people from offshore coming into this country, they don't come with their criminal record. They don't come with a character assessment with them. And if they've been in this country for less than 4 years, it's well worth you contacting the embassy of their original country to see, is there anything that they've done in their own country? Why do I say 4 years? Because it takes about 2 years for the police to complete an investigation. They won't charge you, the embassies, but it's definitely worth contacting them to get the best information possible before you employ. A little trick now that some of these offenders are doing, and I get told a lot when I speak to them, they are now accessing the dark web before they even come out of prison, and they are already getting themselves a perfectly workable DBS check that will pass scrutiny by the devious people and the sinister people they know on the dark web. So they're coming out of prison now, and some of them that have got this access are good to go again back into a school. Freelance tutors are another problem. I don't mean the peripatetic teachers that come into a school who would have to have had a DBS check with the local authority and with the school. I'm talking about the very individual person who sticks their advert up in the local post office, gives you their name, gives you their phone number, I'll come to your house, you come to my house, whatever. They are completely working on their own. They legally do not need a DBS. And they will not get one unless they're affiliated to an organization. So you can ask them for one, but if they've got a criminal record, why are they going to bother trying to get one? They're going to say, well, I don't need one, madam or sir. It's not a legal requirement. But if you still think you want to use that person, then sit in on the lesson. And then if you've got somebody devious, you watch the dynamic change. They won't want you in the lesson. And if that tutor doesn't want you in the lesson to sit with your child, have nothing to do with it. Don't go near that person. And just don't do it. I was a freelance tutor once, many years ago, and I got a CRB check because I had affiliated myself to the Institute of Musicians. But I didn't have to, but I did it for all good reason. But also, aside of safeguarding, aside of that, these freelance tutors actually do not have to go on any upskills. They're not required to go on any professional development. So you don't even know that your money that you're paying for this private tutor is any good, that they're actually teaching in accordance with how your school would want it to be done. So they're literally left out there without any monitoring whatsoever. Now, if you're coming out of a prison, you've already got a job to go back to. You just set yourself up as a freelance tutor and off you go again. Right, so child sexual exploitation, what's the difference between that and child sexual abuse? It's more violent, it involves gangs, multiple abusers. The children are often targeted at primary school. Recently, there have been children similar age group that are hanging around school gates, not a creepy man or anything like that, but somebody, if it's 11-year-olds they're targeting, it wouldn't be unusual to see a 13-year-old actually hanging around the school gates trying to befriend. So this thing, stranger danger, comes on the agenda again. Don't go around talking to people, even kids that you don't know, because you're not sure. It does involve boys and girls of all cultures. And again, the vulnerability on and offline, you'll be targeted. 140,000 children are reported missing every year in the UK, going missing because of the cause and the consequence of child sexual exploitation. So who could be vulnerable? There's that word again. Well, children who are excessively empathic, children that are always picking up the oddball in the school, it always sort of attracts a child that's the lonely one, the oddball, can't make many friends. Children age lacking experience. A lot of the girls that have been part of child sexual exploitation said they just wanted to feel loved, which is really quite sad, really, because that's probably what parents are supposed to be doing. Wanting to feel different. Well, who doesn't want to when you're 12 or 11? Wanting to seek possessions. Who doesn't when you're 12 or 11? Experiencing loss, wanting adventure. Who doesn't want that when you're 12 and 11? So you're at that stage in your age where You're very susceptible, you're very impressionable to look for these things on the outside. It can often begin with being given a mobile phone. So I could be sitting on a park bench somewhere, I'm 13 years old, up comes another girl, talks to me. Could even be someone just calling out names randomly, and suddenly my name is called and I'll turn. And then that person attaches itself to me. But what I wouldn't know is that this phone would have a tracker. So maybe I'm given a phone and it will be the all singing, all dancing one that everybody's got. And this person who's sidled up to me will be saying things like, oh, yeah, my dad's minted, he'll pay the bill, whoa. And we can talk and all that. And so it goes on and everything's fine. Then 2 or 3 days later, you meet. And this person who gave you the phone is saying, oh, you know what I said about that, my dad with the phone and all of that? Well, actually, I know some seriously bad guys, and it's a bit difficult, really, but, you know, could you just take your top off or something and just photograph yourself? And another girl would say, oh, not likely, go away. What she doesn't realize is a tracker in that phone. And the person that's targeted her will say, well, actually, you've got a brother, haven't you, called Mark? He's about 9 years old. These guys know where you live. Now be the child. The person who's been targeted is 12, 13 years old. Now she's worried her brother is going to be attacked. What's she going to do? Be the child. What harm can it do? I'll take the 50 quid and I'll just let a photograph be taken. Oh, that's great, says the other girl. 2 or 3 days later, the girl's back again. Maybe £100 this time. And says, look, you know these guys I told you about? Well, they really want all of you. Like, all of you naked. So just do that for me. No, I'm not doing it anymore, I'm not doing it anymore. Well, the thing is, they are going to rape your mum, and also what you've already given, they're going to put on YouTube. Now you're 12, you're 13, what are you going to do? And this innocent youngster doesn't realize they are being dragged in and hooked in and lured in to a process that's going to get them into significant danger. Recently, where I live, there was a young girl who was just sat around on a park bench and in the town centre, in the precinct, and another girl rocks up, gave her a cigarette, and the girl who took the cigarette lost 5 hours of her life. She doesn't remember how she got where she got, but she woke up half naked in a field. And that's the start of this process. There are 3 types of CSE model. You've got the peer-on-peer model, which is where somebody your own age, maybe in school even, knows someone in the neighborhood who wants to exploit children, and that other playmate of yours at school is in on that ring of people. Then you've got the boyfriend-pimp model, where you're befriended face-to-face, offline, online, lots of grooming, just like we previously explained, the flattery, the gifts, I love you, you're gorgeous, all that stuff, which is a precursor to sexual exploitation, where you'll be sexually abused and you'll be shared with this person's friends. And then the third one is the party model, where you're lured by friends or an older man offering free car rides and really, really fun cars. And then you're taken off to a party venue, and there you'll be given booze, drugs, and sex. And all 3 models end up with booze, drugs, and sex by multiple predators. The person that makes that first inroad is a thing called VIPER. Violence, intimidation, persuasion, aggression. So as that youngster making that first approach, I did offer violence because I threatened that mum would be raped and the brother would be harmed. I aggressively persuaded that girl to get her clothes off, etc. You know, this will happen if not. And that's the first stage of gripping that person, getting that person to actually go along with you. Harder to do it, you see, when they're 15, 16, because they're a bit more savvy. But when they're 12, 13, you know, just striding out into the world, not so sure of themselves, still quite trusting, don't really know what's going on. It's a very good age to target. The 3 stages are like an inverted triangle. The first person that makes the approach is called the hook. So the girl that approached the other girl, it could be a boy, whatever, That person is the hook, the person that offered the phone. Now, once that child is hooked in significantly, which is what happened, the next stage up the triangle is the people called the coordinators. Those people will probably be in their mid-late 20s. They're the people, the taxi drivers, boy, do they have a lot to answer for. The people who are organizing the venue where this party is going to take place, organizing the logistics, organizing how you're going to be trafficked. Now, that's another thing about trafficking. It's not just about young Asian girls and boys coming in at Heathrow and having their passport taken away from them. Trafficking literally means transporting someone from one street to another. That is what trafficking is. So that is the next stage. And then final stage is the predators themselves. Up at that level, at the top level, when they arrive at this party, there'll be about 20 men, 3 times older than the targeted child. So we've targeted a 12-year-old. The hook has managed to hook in a 12-year-old. Then you've got your coordinators, and that youngster will now have sex, raped by 20 men in one night. And they'll be drugged and they'll be raped. And the hook, if the hook isn't successful with bringing people into the party, into that gang to be abused, then that youngster's life is also significantly in danger. And that's how it works. Yes, it's sexual abuse, but it's on an industrial scale, done in gangs. Currently, and it's a fashion, to be honest, it will change. A while ago, it was a very, very well-known cheap clothing store. Now it's a very, very most popular, actually, burger outlet across the UK. Is currently the most dangerous place at the moment for picking up children to exploit, because it would seem a very innocent place for parents to drop their child off. So again, we're going down the stranger danger route again. Don't talk to other youngsters that come and sit at your table if you don't know them. And as I say, that dialogue of stranger danger, I think we have a point of reintroducing it into our language, quite honestly. Where do they hang out? Well, they'll look at derelict buildings. They'll look for the back of schools, leisure parks, big problem. Parks, school gates, this very well-known popular outlet for burgers, and where there's free Wi-Fi, because with the Wi-Fi situation, parents are legally responsible for the traffic that goes in and out of their Wi-Fi and their broadband. If you've signed the contract for the mobile phone or the broadband, the parent, whoever signs the contract, is legally responsible. So if the youngster wants to get up to not such good stuff, they will go and find somewhere where there's free Wi-Fi. That's another place. Corner shops, railway stations. Big problem, especially with this thing called county lines at the moment, is a big problem. Large, expensive cars with blacked out windows. We've all got a camera in our pocket these days. If I see a car that I think, why would that be in that part of town, I immediately take a photograph of it. I take the registration plate. You just don't know whether that could be part and parcel and helpful to the police when they're trying to track down exploiters. Businesses used as a disguise. Where there are empty buildings, a lot of closed down shopping areas now, you'll find them there. Ask why. Why? Why does my child have unusual marks and scars? Why is my child irregularly coming home, or even not till 3 or 4 in the morning, or actually not coming home at all? Why has my child got lots of jewellery, cash, gifts? Why has my child got older friends now? What happened to those mates they used to have? Maybe only a couple of years older, but even so, not the people they used to go around with. Why have they changed their clothing? Why has their underwear changed all of a sudden? Their diet. They're not eating, maybe. Their music tastes. Why? Any change of behaviour. Overly tired and moody and unresponsive is, of course, the CV of any teenager. But I'm talking about the child that still can't get up on a Saturday afternoon till 4 o'clock. Why? You wouldn't be as tired as that unless you've had something significant happen to you, or you've been given something that has drugged you, doped you, whatever. Why is my child known to taxi drivers? It is sadistic torture. These youngsters are drugged, they are raped in vast quantities, and they are threatened. if they don't tell or obey the commands that they're given. And it's happening in every town. Don't just think it's Rotherham, Rochdale, Newcastle, and all those known places. It is in every town, but people just choose to ignore it. So, revisiting our teaching skills. What's the message we're taught at college? Revisit, revisit. Safer. Sense, alert, focus, engage, record. Does it make more sense now, the process of grooming? I certainly hope so. So this section is talking about the impact of abuse and trauma and how that impact is manifested in the school or any environment. So here comes my Play-Doh ball again. The cortisol through trauma. Animals have adrenaline. We have adrenaline and cortisol is extremely dangerous, and it spikes and it stays spiking for a long time. So if we had a sudden shock now, we nearly were killed by a lorry, not only would our heartbeat race, but our cortisol would actually spike. And we would find ourselves trying to self-soothe. We'd probably rub our arms like this, or we might go and light a cigarette, or go and have a drink or something, or have to tell a friend to try and drop that level down. And the cortisol takes a long time to drop down. So it spikes. It eats away, as I described before, at the healthy brain cells, and it changes the landscaping and the coding of the brain. And the healthy brain grows at twice the rate of an abused one, which is why it is so important about early intervention, that when that child starts school and its behaviors are off the wall, or during school and its behaviors are off the wall, investigate it right there and then to minimize that harm that's happening. This slide is about the window of tolerance. In between the parallel lines is where most of us actually operate, like a little wave machine. But the child who's been abused, and even the adult who maybe has not dealt with it or managed it perhaps, are living outside those lines. They can be very, very hyper. And then between the lines, they're okay for a while. And then they drop down to this depressive low, like bipolar, that sort of behavior, high and low. You're like a huge wave machine. And if you're living like that, it's very difficult to actually concentrate on your schoolwork because your emotions are all over the place. And I just want to show you and see how you're going to respond to this little experiment. So how do you feel about balloons? I'm just going to blow this one up. Are you feeling nervous? A lot of people would. Am I going to bang it, pop it? What am I going to do? That's that tension. If you don't like balloons, that tension and anxiety, is that going to pop? Is that going to pop? Oh, that's what's going on behind the eyes of the abused child all the time. That tension, that anxiety behind the eyes that they haven't been able to talk about. And we wonder why that's impacted their academic success. It's not rocket science, but be that balloon. So the impact. Children up to 7 years of age displaying overly sexualized behaviors. And any reasonable person knows where the line of tolerance would be. But overly sexualized, under the age of 7, they have either seen it or they've experienced it. Their brain has not developed enough to make up the graphic stories that we hear every day. Oh, my goodness. The struggle I have, I would so wish that the social services and the police would realize that that is part of the evidence. You cannot have a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old making up stories of what daddy is doing with their bottom. They have seen it or they've had it done to them. And I repeat, that has to be part of evidence, I believe, because it's not possible for them to invent it. We had a gentleman called Leon Edwards who runs an amazing organization in Suffolk called Push Forward, and he was formerly one of our trustees. Now, he gets a lot of funding. He looks after the children who have excluded themselves from the excluded schools they were sent to. So basically, they're just hanging around the streets. They are not interested in any form of education at all. But they may be 14, 13 years old. And he puts them through this 9-month boot camp, which is hugely successful. And he's got a success rate of about 75% of these children turning their lives around. He is incredibly inspirational. But they have to go through a very rigorous assessment before he takes them on. And out of the hundreds and hundreds of children that he's had through his doors, this is the statistic he's come up with, that 7 out of 9 of those children, 7 out of 9 of them, excluded from mainstream education, were sexually abused as youngsters. Children who are frail, puny, I don't mean slender or slim, I mean almost looking haunted, looking like almost within themselves, a shadow of their former self, that the brain can forget to let the body grow. The brain focuses all the time on your trauma, whatever that trauma is, and things stop while it's going through that process. Now, I absolutely can hold testimony to this. The picture of the boys that you saw earlier, the boy on the left, the fair-haired one, and the one on the right, the dark-haired one. The dark-haired one kept on growing, but at about 13, 14 years of age, the one on the left, the fair-haired one, stopped growing. And the other one continued. There was 6 inches between their growth when they were about 15, and they were twins. Now, when I went to the doctors said, oh, well, it's because he's got asthma. It's all the medication he's on. It sort of kind of made sense. Then it all went to court, and everything was put to bed. So after the court case, everything was put to bed. So the lad on the left, the tension had gone, the trauma had gone. The brain then came online again and allowed his body to grow. And in that time at university, he grew 6, 7 inches. We couldn't believe it. He's now 6'3", the tallest of the 3 boys. But that's another sign, that puny, frail, and I can think of one child especially that I feel quite guilty about even now, that absolutely was that child. Sexual abuse is often hidden when neglect is perceived as the issue. So why doesn't a child want to wash? Does anybody ask why that child's unkempt? Wonder what happens when it has a bath? You just don't know, do you? Very often, ADHD is given the label when it's actually post-traumatic stress disorder. It can manifest itself very, very similarly, but oh, we're so quick to just give them Ritalin when we should be doing maybe a deeper analysis of what it could be. It's not always ADHD. Child sexual abuse causes abnormalities in the brain. We've seen that in the Play-Doh. 91% poor school achievement and development academically is related to abuse. Remember the balloon? Could you concentrate, if you didn't like that balloon, could you concentrate all the time with that going on behind your eyes? I doubt it. 80% of young offenders were sexually abused. Well, their main emotion is anger. And then one day, it all bubbles over the top. Bingo, they do something dreadful. So when you see these youngsters slobbing around town and misbehaving, they weren't born like that. Where did it come from? 86% of abused children suffer from delayed language development. I'm not talking about estuary English. I'm talking about development, your linguistic development skills. This part of the brain, this frontal process of the brain here, the frontal lobes here, are what's harmed with that cortisol spiking. So you're looking at maybe a child who's got really, really good academic grades and everything else, but weirdly, come language, when it's writing essays or something like that, it's inability to find the right adjectives or whatever, vocabulary, there's a dip. Why? Why? Also stammers. Stammers is a massive sign. If you've got that balloon going off in your face the whole time, and your shoulders are like this, you can't breathe. Can't breathe. You're overly anxious all the time. Be the child. Elected mute is an absolute sign that that child may be abused. So terrified, can't even speak. Another clue, children who persistently daydream. Now, should you be a teacher? Are you a boring teacher? Should you perhaps be working in a supermarket or whatever, but maybe not be a teacher? Or are you asking, why is that child daydreaming? It might be that it's going to have a fantastic weekend. It might be fantastic. Maybe they're going to a great party, but maybe it's every Wednesday that you notice they're daydreaming. Do you actually engage with your colleagues? Could it be that that child's dissociating because it's terrified of what might happen when it goes home tonight, or what it knows is going to happen? Why do certain children not want to go home from school? Do we ask? Or do we just assume? But dissociation isn't just something that adults do. Children do it as well out of fear. But do you ask that child, why are you doing it? What are you doing? If it goes, don't know, miss, yeah. Maybe that's another clue. 70% of girls placed in residential care homes become sex workers. That's huge. And children go into residential care homes damaged already, with yet more damaged people, and the abuse continues. And that still happens today, as it ever did. Child abuse is the preamble to suicide, drug and alcohol dependence, self-harming, eating disorders. We already have 5- and 6-year-olds in this country self-harming. A lot of people put it down to academic stress. You know, independent schools and the SATs tests and all of that. Seriously? You know, 5, 6 years old, self-harming. And the way the brain, that Play-Doh brain, is distorted and those neural pathways have been broken, it makes a perfect landscape for that person to slide in to those different situations. And also, is a gaining control over their pain. I will get to see what I'm eating and all of this, that, and the other. And that's why I go back to that slide about your ancillary workers. Your ancillary workers will see the eating disorders. They'll see the vomit in the toilets. Your cooks and chefs will see the change in eating patterns. And don't forget, boys have eating behaviors too, not just girls. Boys are like a forgotten gender somehow in this. And we must encourage the boys to come and speak out more. It doesn't say anything about their sexuality. It just says they were abused. And we must get the lads to actually come forward more. So, now then, what happens here? Primary school teacher me. This box of matches here represents very, very healthy neural pathways, okay? In fact, no one's life is that great, but, you know, a bit simplistic, but there we go. Everything's up the right way. Everything's set to go to be the person that person was born to be, to reach the potential that they should be able to do. And also, they have the choices that they can make because they've got all that in play. Healthy, robust. This is what goes on behind the eyes of someone who's been abused. All that brokenness, all those broken matches, upside down, the wrong way, splintered, already struck. What are you going to do with that? Now, with early intervention, you could get all those matches up the right way again, but a degree of it will always be permanent. There'll always be those matches you cannot put another head on again. There's those matches that you can never actually take the splinters away. Some of it is permanent, and that's why it is so important that we get to grips with this at the earliest stage. Nursery schools, children's centres, infants, primary schools have such a massive role to play in actually containing this heinous crime that is in our society. And we are heading for a massive train crash if we don't. The trouble with cutbacks is people have raised the thresholds with referrals. So there's less social workers. The gap of referring is actually greater now than it ever was. So children are being left at risk more than they ever were. And therefore it's down to us to do something about it. It is every child's right to stay safe. And it's every adult and parent's duty to ensure they do. I so hope you've learned from this. And if you can help one child, then your oxygen's worth it. Thank you. So what's a really simple thing to get children to stay safe? Actually, a simple thing. Have you heard of the swimwear rule? Well, I say, and I say this to my grandson, what you wear when you go to the swimming baths or the beach, you wear swimming trunks, girls wear a swimsuit or a bikini. What goes inside that swimming wear, be it trunks, a bikini or a swimsuit, no one looks at, no one touches, no one photographs. And that's an easy way of saying, if that's where my swimming trunks go, it's mine, it's private, no one touches it, no one photographs it, no one looks at it either than me and maybe my mum and dad because they've seen me running around. And the same with the girls. Use that rule, and that's a very simple, easy thing to explain to children. So, if you've been the sad end of this awful, horrible crime, or you know somebody that has been, we can't change our past. I can't change the fact that my 3 sons were sexually abused. I am not going to make it a prisoner of my life. You can lay it down. We can teach children to be resilient, and that should start at a very young age and not be too soft with them. Make them resilient. And you can, and some, not all, but some people can bounce back. Surviving, what's that? You know, people talk about survivors like it's a trite word, but not everybody does survive. Not everybody does. You know, adults abuse as children, 12 times more likely to try to take their own life. That is unbelievably sad. Some people can recover really well, but all of us should be on the journey. Surviving is just about scraping along the bottom of the sort of the swimming pool or the pond, you know, struggling to get up in the morning. How about thriving? Thriving is like bouncing back higher than you ever were in a better situation. We help people like that. We use an organization called the Thrive Program that can get you out the other side in 8 one-hour sessions, who have a phenomenal success rate, up in the high 90% of actual success with everybody they have, with any anxiety, eating disorder, alcoholic, drug addiction, you name it. We're here to help. Please contact us. We can put you their way, 8 one-hour sessions, and you'll turn a huge corner and walk in the sunshine again. So take care of yourself. Please keep children safe around you and in your life. And thank you so much. Bye-bye.